This is I think my fifth talk at the Philly Bike Expo, and perhaps I think I pushed it absolutely to the limit this time. I wrote this just the last hour at lunch. So, but last year was the same way, and it made a comeback on YouTube just a few months ago. So, thank you all again for coming. This is, of course, I think that Bina announced it just as a TED Talk, which is kind of like our running joke every time because I never have an idea when we come up with these when she asks and whatnot. So yeah, we'll just put it on the schedule as Ultra Romance TED Talk. So thanks for coming with only that information. It means a lot. Today, I had a few ideas ruminating in my brain on rides and whatnot over the last month, but I kept coming back to bike builds, which is a supremely nerdy thing to get into, and I suppose it comes with the territory here. We all come to the Philly Bike Expo, right, because of our love for the curated bike, right? We're not just cyclists that go to a department store and are going out for a few rides per year. We're actually interacting and using and objectifying the components that we put on our bikes and our bicycles and what we use them for. And so the build ends up being, I think, just as important, if not more important, than the actual frame set you're buying. The build is something that I take great pride in. It's something that occupies maybe about half of my brain on any given day. And I take great pleasure in knowing that every component on my bicycle I know the ins and outs of. It may be something that only I know how to work on, and if somebody tries to borrow my bike, it feels like a total piece of trash, but to me it's awesome. And I suppose that's a theft deterrent also if you live in the city. So it's something that is very important. I see as very important, and more often than not. Again, I should preface all of this by saying this is very much an opinion piece. Okay, so let's digest it as such. I see a lot of folks out there who have the money to spend, right, and they have the desire to think outside of the big bike box, right? But seemingly can't see over the garish logos, and it's a confusing place to be when you are you've got everything laid out for your fresh build. You've been waiting for this frame, maybe from a custom builder, from somebody upstairs for a few years sometimes. And what are your choices of putting on that bike? Well, I guess we're going with SRAM again, right? Show of hands, SRAM, Campagnolo, or Shimano. Raise your hand for SRAM. How many people have SRAM on their bikes? Okay, all right, Campagnolo. All right, okay. And Shimano. Okay, still overwhelmingly Shimano. Now,
How old are they?
yeah, right, how old are the components? We're gonna get into that, Bruce. So again, going back to this being an opinion piece, I want to say that my question is, when did they stop? We're wheeling this in as a SRAM example. Let me get this right. Why did they stop making things that are universally beautiful? And beauty can be objective and subjective, but I read this. Actually, this is what happens when you Google search. Is beauty objective or subjective? This is what you'll get. Saying beauty is in the eye of the beholder suggests subjective, but other sayings, beauty is truth or beauty is eternal, suggest there is some objective quality to beauty. Advocates of the subjective view emphasize how difficult it is to get people to agree on aesthetic judgments, right? And that's art. My art form is the bike build, and I cannot stop thinking about it and looking at it in the light of there are things that are beautiful and there are things that are not. There are shapes in nature, and then there are shapes that are completely manufactured and made to be mass produced, right? So I'm going to go into a little brief history of how that came to be, how the bicycle, this is something that you can see throughout your you know, if you're a modern day consumer, you look at everything that's made today, just about everything, and it all falls into that category, right? It was something that was borrowed from something that was beautiful maybe 3 or 4 or 5 generations ago in their product, and they've tried to make it as you know, as cheaply as possible to still be able to charge the most amount of money for it and make it so you need to get something new each year, and moving forward, moving further and further and further away from a beautiful quality product that you're going to have, you know, for 10, 20 years. So, I might be reading a little bit here. It's true, many of you are or aspire to take these machines to beautiful places, right? Okay? And natural places to me are objective, right? Those are, you want to mess with the whatever kind of creator you believe in, like this world came here to be in some specific way, and even though we have kind of messed with it in every way we can, cutting down trees, putting up huge buildings and whatnot, there are certain things about nature, right, that you can't explain why they're beautiful, they just are. And I think that that's something that's just in the natural order of things. And we're bringing these bikes out into places like that. And who are we to insert our humanity, the side of capitalism that is inherently makes these products not beautiful because they need to be cheaply produced at a high, you know, in high volume. You know, who are we to bring this kind of garishly clad clothing, like super, like Day-Glo accents and Shimano GRX shifters. I go on and on about those. I always reference those as the ugliest bicycle component ever made in history. Sorry if you have Shimano GRX shifters. This is an opinion piece. I loved how they tried to make them silver last year. Everyone remember that? That was vomit-inducing. Bad taste in my mouth. So I do find it disrespectful to take Shimano GRX in a place like this, yet it happens every day. And we need to fight against that. This is a great way to take your mind off the heavy stuff in the world, all right? I know I dump on SRAM a lot, but I think in my opinion, SRAM and modern componentry, and you could look at Adam Sklar's bike over there. It's a very basic build, right? You got your SRAM, and you want to add a little bit of pepper to it. So, oh, I know, I'm going to put on that White Industry crank because what else is there out there? You know, or like, okay, the little Paul, you know, little flashes of Paul and whatnot. You know, Paul and White Industries, they're like the only component manufacturers left of the golden era of the 90s, of when everybody and their uncle had a machine shop and they were making really cool stuff to put on your bike. I feel like in many ways we're maybe coming back around to that with how accessible things become. There's no marketing barrier with the internet, and so you could have small makers that are making cool stuff, and they can now, without the help of a distributor, can sell direct to people. So I hope we're seeing a little bit more of that as we kind of realize that we don't need bicycles components and bicycles that are designed strictly around racing, because how many people in here race? Yeah, see, it's still an important part of the cycling culture, but it shouldn't be what all bicycles are based off of, right? Okay, well, I've a little history on my journey to aesthetically beautiful componentry. I have been out of the modern bike scene pretty much since maybe 2002 was the last time I owned a suspension bike. And I think I was just kind of falling out of love with the bicycle in general because I was just not finding wasn't finding the beauty in the suspension and all of the moving parts and how complicated everything was getting. I was no longer working at a bike shop, and things just became more and more confusing for me every time I checked back in as to what the industry was doing. About 5 years ago, I spent 3 years as a sponsored athlete with Specialized. I emphasize athlete. That's funny, come on. not athlete. And I got to test out a bunch of new stuff that I had never thought I would ride, and a lot of SRAM, okay? And I got to try out one buys and like test all the drink all the Kool-Aid of the modern component manufacturers and see how that worked over, this wasn't my job title, but I ended up just seeing, oh, how will this work? What if we change this around, this, that, and that? And kind of like, how do we make this look all right? Like if I change out, I have a big thing with outboard bearing bottom brackets. That's like my say no word. And so that's the first thing that I switch when I get any new bike. It's like, get that outboard bearing bottom bracket out there, put in a square taper, because there are no good looking outboard bottom bracket cranksets, and in my opinion piece. So I am going to go on to a little brief history of basically how component groups came to be. You have, going back as far as 1923, you have the founder of Simplex, which is a French component manufacturer that's no longer with us. Became Sachs-Hurett later on. He was he was a shop owner trying to get a derailleur on a Paris-Roubaix bikes. It was in 1928. Now it wasn't until I believe 1937 when they allowed derailleurs in the Tour de France. So it kind of go back to like where the mindsets were at this point. You were doing incredibly grueling rides with one speed, oftentimes fixed geared, and these Tour de France stages were way harder than they are today, and of course they weren't paved at all either. So these were grueling races, and you would think like, oh, a rear derailleur, multiple gears, that sounds really nice, doesn't it? But no, that was outlawed until 1937. Fausto Coppi, the great Italian rider, finally won a Tour de France on a Simplex rear derailleur in 1949, but quickly Campagnolo took over. And they released the Grand Sport, and there is decades of dominance before Shimano enters the scene in the 60s. Many of you how many people in here ride Suntour? That's surprising. That was more than Campagnolo. Wow. Go figure. Suntour is a much beloved component manufacturer to many of us because they were kind of the underdog, but they had really good ideas. Most notably the slant parallelogram rear derailleur. Does everyone know what a slant parallelogram is? Yeah, nod with me. Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. The slant parallelogram, if you think of your rear derailleur moving through the gears, it kind of wags, right? The slant parallelogram is slanted ever so slightly so that the contours, as you're shifting down, the contours of the pulley wheels match up with the cassette. So it makes a much crisper and more reliable shift. Suntour patented this in the 60s. And where you get like 20 years off a patent. And so Shimano and Campagnolo were instantly on their back heels because everybody was buying these cheap Suntour Grand Sport rear derailleurs. It didn't matter like what, if like they're better finished rear derailleurs and then their cheap versions, they all worked better than Campagnolo and Shimano. And of course, back then, it was common to mix component group. There weren't component groups, so to speak. You could mix anything. Like with friction shifting, you could mix any cassette with any rear derailleur to a fault and have a functioning bicycle. So oftentimes, one of the first things I learned from some old heads in the road racing scene in my local town in Connecticut, they're old Italian guys, and they all had bikes from the 70s, their Campagnolo Super Record, and they'd be like, these shifters suck. We switch them out for Simplex retro frictions. And I was like, oh, that is cool. So you could just like switch all this stuff out. That was like, I couldn't wrap my head around that since I had grown up in the 90s post index shifting. So, okay. So Suntour's patent party ran out in 1982. And Shimano instantly pounced by releasing their own slant parallelogram rear derailleur, and their finish quality was better. They had a better quality control. Shimano was kind of taken off. Suntour was being less and less of a competitive force. And certainly when certainly when SIS was born. SIS, I can't remember what the acronym means. Anyone? There we are, that's what we wanted to say. Shimano Index Shifting, that's an easy one. SIS came around, index shifting in the late 80s, early 90s. Suntour didn't believe that people would actually think that index shift, like actual racers or enthusiasts, actual cyclists would want index shifting because it was so limiting. They thought that anybody, just like, I would compare like index shifting, friction shifting to, if I were to compare it to like automobiles, which I know very little about, that would be automatic transmission versus manual transmission, right? And so I think, from what I gather from car people, they like the manual transmission feel because you're more connected to the whatever. Just like in car and bikes, you like the friction shifting because you're more connected to your drivetrain. You could feel when you're in the right shift or not. You don't have to have everything adjusted perfectly because your brain does that for you. And once you do it enough, you know, if you make the commitment and be like, no more indexing, I'm going to do friction everything. Like, you will learn it. You'll pick it up really quick, and you'll take pride in every shift and interacting with your machine. It's a really cool feeling. I say this as a recovering indexer. 10 years now. Feeling good. Thank you. So yeah, Suntour had a very small research and development team, and they resisted indexing, and that was ultimately their demise. By the early 90s, if anybody was around back then, I can recall some really cool bikes being stocked with Suntour componentry, mainly the Bridgestones. They actually did a pretty cool mixture of component groups. I believe Grant Peterson was behind a lot of that, like Mavic cranksets with Suntour rear derailleurs and Shimano front derailleurs. Really cool to look at those build specs, because you know that somebody with a brain went in there and was like, this component works best from this manufacturer, this component works best from this manufacturer. We're using friction shifting, so it doesn't matter. We got cross compatibility everywhere. We're just going to release a bike with the best, what we think is the best component group. I thought that was really cool. It's really cool to look back on if anyone wants to dig around on eBay or some obscure sites for old Bridgestone stuff. It's really cool to see their component picks. I would say that that's a really nice primer to, do they pronounce that primer or primer? Primer. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, whatever way. A really nice primer to the art of the build. Okay, in my opinion, again, the opinion piece. In my opinion, the last great group set, and not entirely great, was the Shimano XTR M950, 8-9 speed, depending upon what year you got it in. It was the last of the really nice stuff. And as you can see, I use that era rear derailleur almost exclusively on all my builds. It's just a beautiful era, 1996 or so. Things are Japanese made. I believe even the lower end Shimano stuff was still Japanese made at that point. You have really beautiful finishes. This dark gray is kind of like became XTR gray, and it was like such a huge thing because it was the first like non-polished component that was released, that was high end. The component group that was before this was arguably better looking, of course, because it had that really nice polish on it, but doesn't work quite as well. What else came out of this? I could say that this was kind of like the marker. The M950 was kind of like a marker of an era, like a turn of the tides. I wish I had some photos to show you, but does anyone remember the Octolink bottom bracket? It was something we'd like to forget. Shimano tried to reinvent the wheel for probably the 10th time. Now they've probably tried 30, 40, 50 times with messing around with a bottom bracket standard that had already been around for, we'll just say eons. The square taper bottom bracket, which ironically enough, you could still buy brand new today. They still make square taper bottom brackets. But Shimano decided it was going to mess with that a little bit and make this. It was still an inboard bearing bottom bracket, but they made the interface a little bit different. And so the cranks from this era aren't nearly as nice because you can't mess them around. You can only put them on an Octolink bottom bracket. So moving forward from that, the dreaded, late 90s, early 2000s, that's I call the dreaded mid-school era. I don't think the components from that era will ever be collectible because they are so damn ugly. And I wish I had some stuff to show you. You'd run right out of here. You'd be like, get me out of here. This is Halloween, get me out of here. It was scary. Okay, we're talking, everyone remember the STI shifting that was in the brake levers? Remember that? Oh, that was for mountain bikes. Shimano luckily only did that for like 2 years before everyone puked. I mean, everyone around the world was puking when they saw those things. All right. Moving forward from that, we had so the dark ages, maybe until about 2000. No, we're still on the dark ages. The dark ages, heavily technological dark ages, that's what we're in right now. But in the midst of all this, a new component manufacturer emerged, right? Does everyone remember grip shift? Grip shift was something that was pretty cool in the 90s. Sachs was the first to come out with something like that. It was cross-compatible with 8-speed drivetrains, even though it was indexed. I believe you had I can't even recall, maybe it really was only Shimano making mountain bike components at that point. And so you would just make it, or you had your Sachs New Success. Remember that component group? I love that name. I loved like the lost in translation, like French, German stuff with, what's a great name for this component group? New Success, yes. So grip shift emerged. SRAM was kind of like this outlier and bought grip shift, and over time started making their own mountain bike equipment. And SRAM was an American brand, which I think we felt as Americans, we were like, well, we own mountain biking, like we invented this. We need to have our own, our own brands, our own component manufacturer. And I think we really globbed onto SRAM. We grabbed onto that flagpole and rode with it. And in doing this, we ushered in the SRAM road group sets. Everyone, I think it was about 2006 when Rival and Force came out. This was it was a pretty big deal because it was only Shimano and Campagnolo, nothing else. People had totally forgotten about Suntour at this point. Suntour was just a distant memory, and all of a sudden this like mountain bike component manufacturer that we knew, we knew from other things by then, but you just have like grip shift in your head and no one was using that anymore. And they come out with a road group set, and it's a big hit almost immediately. I know I bought the first, I think it was Rival. I think it was cool if you were a crit racer to have Rival because it wasn't carbon. Is that right? No crit racers here? And so it was a big deal. But that was pretty much the kiss of death, I think, for homogenizing modern bicycle componentry because everyone had to follow suit with what they were doing. And really until I think probably Shimano and Campagnolo and SRAM were kind of dead even really until, not dead even, don't quote me on that, until about 2012 when SRAM came out with the one-by system. Now of course the one-by systems had been used in years past with a much lower range rear cassette. I've seen some really cool examples on Tashi over there. His Cunninghams have like a really cool, was that a 38 tooth in the rear, which is pretty neat. So you're running a 1-by with an 1138, which is a pretty good range still, but it was 5-speed. So you're having some pretty big jumps between gears. But SRAM came out with an 1142, I believe, was their first wide range cassette with a 1-by, and it pretty much completely took the mountain bike world by storm. Shimano didn't come out with a 1-by group until much later, and they really suffered because of it. And because of that today, mountain bikes, Shimano only takes up 27% of the what do you call it? Market share, whereas a mountain bike SRAM is 71%. And they came out of nowhere, only 20 years ago or so, and dethroned a component manufacturer that had been around since the 60s. It's pretty wild. And I would attest that entirely to the 1-by innovation. Of course, along with 1-by innovations, you've got all sorts of problems, which we'll get into a little bit later. Aesthetically, of course. This is some other. So road bikes, Shimano still has 76% of the market share, which is pretty interesting. Cyclocross gravel bikes, 51. kind of dead even, Shimano and SRAM. To me, interacting with these modern components, especially putting on that first SRAM group, I remember reading on, what was it, I don't know what forums we were on back then, but I could remember reading a lot of them, and deciding like a lot of the quality issues, people saying, oh, this SRAM stuff is great for one season. I just always remember that. It's like burned into my brain. Oh, great for one season. It's kind of a throwaway group though. You're not going to use this for more than two seasons, especially if you're a racer. And I remember like that really like sinking in. I was like, oh, so this is kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of the feeling. I was like, this is the way things are going right now. It's kind of like a hint of what's to come, right? And so, even though they were putting out new groups here and there, it was always like there was nothing really that new, and it was obvious they were just trying to sell. I think I talked about this a lot on my last year's talk. You just caught up in the product sell cycle, and you've got to sell something. It's got to be new. You've got to discount your old stuff, and there's got to be a reason to buy it. And so if it's not worn out, then it's got to be something completely innovative. And so let's just make our stuff wear out so we don't have to be so innovative. And that's what happened, in my opinion. Again, opinion. Okay. Modern components to me felt poorly made. And going forward to today, some of you even need a laptop to tune. So that's just get a motorcycle. All right. I am, so taking what we were just talking about there, how do you apply, how do you kind of swim through these waters of being marketed all this stuff and realizing that there are other options out there, and price is a big motivating factor for people, right? We're just really dumping on Adam's bike, but I don't want to. Adam's bike here, I recently was told how much something like that costs. Again, it's a beautiful frame and fork, of course, but this is Adam's Taiwanese offering all the way to the left that he just pre-sold a few days ago. You've got a basic SRAM group on there with the like cool bits and bobs, but something like that you're going to spend nearly $6,000 for. And I was like, what? And I was like, that looks like that's just any other bike, It's like you could get those components anywhere and put them on a bike, and I guess that's just how much it costs these days, And we've been kind of like, I think we've all been expecting big price increases these past 3 years and whatnot. Again, maybe we're all like conditioned to that, but there's like some really cool stuff out there that you could still get at a very reasonable price. So when I think of what my budget is for a rear derailleur, a front derailleur, a crankset, I'm looking at $50 for a rear derailleur, maybe $25 for a front derailleur, a crankset. I'm not spending more than maybe $150 for a real nice one. Better have like good rings that are still usable. A bottom bracket I'm spending maybe $25 for. Brakes, of course, these on my bike, these are Paul touring cannies. These are expensive. They work great, but you could find cantilever brakes out there that were made, the Mayfax are a prime example. You could find cantilever brakes that were made 60 years ago. They're still going to work great. It's just a very simple design that we mastered, and we didn't have to do anything afterwards, but that's just the human condition to always better things, right? So we tried. So, price is a big motivating factor for me when doing these types of builds, and getting your money's worth, and like you're trying to curate this bicycle and make it special to you and learn how to work on it and, be able to fix it when you're out in the wild. There's certain things that you learn by working on your bikes when you could see everything work and see all the moving parts. It becomes like a very cool, I don't know, it's like it's cycling not as an activity, but an experience, right? And these types of bikes, I can tell you, are very, there's a lot of perceived simplicity on it. I mean, messing and tuning a front derailleur is not for the faint of heart. I think that's generally why people just said, no more front derailleurs. We're gonna put 11 speeds, 12 speeds, 13 speeds in the rear. We went through great lengths to avoid mastering the front derailleur. But I think it's also important to remember like what you're using the bike for. Again, only 2 people raised their hands here when I asked if you were racers or not, and so are you trying, friction shifting and being able and having to like kick your front derailleur to make it work is great if you're just riding in the woods by yourself or like cruising the bike path or something. If you're racing, obviously that's not going to win you any races. I'd love to see a Wout van Aert sprinting for the finish line and kicking his front derailleur to have it go in and taking the victory. I mean, that would be pretty cool, but I know it's not going to happen. So that's, the big component manufacturers are making components for that person, not us, okay? And so I think it's important to realize where we put our money and what we're paying for. We're not paying for the Tour de France win. We're not looking for that. Let's see here. Yeah, I think I wrote that down here. We're not held up in the product cycle death march of Tour de France victories or the chains that keep breaking. There was a record number of chains breaking in the Tour de France this year as people switched to 11 and 13, to 12 and 13 speed rear clusters, which is Campagnolo is doing 13 speeds now. It's pretty wild. And the chains are they're like threads, basically. And of course they're breaking, and so you have people, so you even have like the professional racers that are like, stop innovating, for the love of God, stop innovating. And so, you have people losing races because chains are breaking. And I thought Bob Roll had a really nice quip on that. He's like, they keep on making these chains narrower and narrower. You gotta know, 9 is fine, 9 is fine. Couldn't agree more, So, boy, got a bunch of bullet points here. What I look for, so now we're going to get into the art of the build. I've got 2 examples up here, this being my interpretation of an all-terrain bicycle, and then this being a more road or gravel-centric all-terrain bicycle. We have some eBay finds here, some parts bins finds here. Again, I would say that I collect these things. I was having this conversation with Tashi the other day. You're not a collector if you use it, So I like to collect things and then use the hell out of them and show off how used they are. So that's why I don't clean my bikes. This one just got built up the other day, but it'll be pretty dirty soon enough. We've got. I like to start, of course, with. The one-buy system is cost prohibitive, and I don't like having to, keep an eye on the chain and the cassette and how everything is matching up and whether or not it's wearing prematurely, and having to buy a new $500 cassette because, of course, I would only buy the gold one. So it makes it a lot easier for me to have 10, 15 bikes if they all have budget drivetrains. I still end up spending just as much money. It's an addiction, but I'm not recovering from that, and I don't intend to. So I start with a wide range double. You can see on both of these bikes that's a different wide range double, but you have a large gear ratio between. Again, we need to start with the crankset because the crankset is the centerpiece of every bike build. That's where your eye goes immediately. And it's a shame in modern componentry, they have made that nearly the ugliest part of every single bike. You look at Campagnolo used to have the most beautiful cranksets, beautifully finished, nice 5-arm Spider, and now it just looks like a tribal tattoo or something. Like it's very like tribally influenced. Like really bad stuff. And that's generally where everything goes. And so we start with the wide range double and we go on from there. We know we're using a wide range double. This is a 20 tooth, which is my smallest gear. It goes to a 36, and then the outer ring is a 38 bash guard. I don't use that outer ring. This one I believe is just a standard 30-46, which is a really good like randonneer gearing or any gearing if you're not road racing. In the rear, that's an 1132, and I believe that is too. You could tell me if they look totally different, and I'll take that back. Not great at counting. And always use a 9-speed chain because they're the strongest. And they're still super light, and you can still get them like with the little cutout windows in anodized gold, which is very important. I always go with square taper cranks, of course. There's a bunch of stuff out here. This one right here is a 94, so BCDs are something that you want at bolt circle diameter, something you want to keep in mind when you're going for a wide range double. You could do it with a 110 BCD is standard, okay? And that's something that you'll find on like compact road gearing or just like basic triple mountain bike gearing. This goes one step beyond that. It's a 94 BCD with an 82 or 83 tiny ring BCD. So you've got I'm able to run a super tiny little ring, the 20, and then go up to a 36. This one's a 50.4 BCD. I'm going to lose a lot of people here. This one you could use all sorts of cool rings with. I think it could go down to a 26. And they look really cool. And these TA cranks and the 50.4 BCD cranks have been around forever. You could find a lot of them that came on, didn't come on, but they're really the only wide range crank you can get in the early mountain bike days when the Breezers were first coming out. They all had those TA cranks on them. 5-arm cranks are, most modern cranks are 4-arm, and it just doesn't look right. 5-arm, gotta be 5-arm, sorry. I want you to imagine when you've got a new build in the queue, say you've just got your new frame set or something, you've got to imagine that build. Don't just export that onto a mechanic or something. Like imagine it. Go to bed thinking about it, wake up thinking about it. You hear something getting bombed or a stampede happening somewhere, like go to your happy place, go to that bike build, okay? Midterms coming up, go to that bike build, okay? It's a happy place, and you want to hang out there for a while. Meditate on the build. I like to use the use of small component folks is really cool. Like as I was touching on earlier, like White Industries and Paul still make really cool, great stuff, but they're the only ones out there, and you don't want to overdo it. Okay, nobody wants to see like a Paul or White Industries concept bike. We've already seen that. It's been on the Radavist so many times. Okay, it's at every American hand-built bike show. It's all the same bike. Some Envy fork gravel bike with SRAM with a White Industries crank, right? We all know what it looks like. Again, sorry, I don't mean to be mean, but so just little touches. You don't want to go overboard, just a little splash here and there, okay? And I also say you've always got to have something a little bit off on your build so it doesn't look like you're trying too hard. On this bike, of course, it's the mismatched bottom bracket cups. And you may also notice if you look closely, we forgot to order the derailleur hanger on that, so we filed one down out of a plate of steel. Very lightweight. So yeah, just little things off, that only you can explain. Somebody might go up to it and be like, what happened here? And you're like, well, let me tell you. It tells a story. Carbon forks, of course, homogenize every bike. I think a lot of people are not a lot of people, but I think in our little counterculture, people are moving away from carbon forks on their custom bikes and starting to want that frame builder to build them a fork also. And those frame builders are like, I don't know, I haven't built a fork in a while. That seems like a lot of, I've heard time and time again that the fork is more work than the actual bike. And so that's why they just do the carbon forks. And they also get a good markup, good margin from Envy on those carbon forks. So it's just like, well, we're just gonna put this fork on there and I'm gonna design my bike around somebody else's fork. That's not the custom bike you want. Logos, of course, are contentious, but it's cool on old stuff. You could always wipe the logos off and write your own stuff on there. It's Ronnie Logic. Let's see. Choose your cranks wisely. Brakes, of course, disc brakes, of course, they work fine, right? But they don't look as cool. And it's been that's been the strangest journey for me in this whole thing is I really got into disc brakes. I really thought they worked beautifully. and it was kind of like an era, I guess, where they were a little bit they were rarer. You know, it was kind of like a thing to have disc brakes. Be like, oh, check these disc brakes out, you know, and they would always sound. I remember they'd always sound like there was some mini sword fight going on your front wheel, right? It's always making sounds, and so that, in a combination with just how damn ugly they all are, I just was like, you know what, it's time to just throw these disc brakes in the trash. We gotta start from scratch here, or start from scratch by going back. And for me, I think I only own one bike out of many with disc brakes today, which is pretty. I never would have thought that 10 years ago. So you just generally have a lot more cool options to go back into the parts bin and find. And luckily now there's a lot of. I remember being at Paul at their facility a few years ago, and Travis had just gotten back from a production meeting, and we're like, you know what, we're just not selling any rim brakes anymore, and I think we're gonna discontinue a bunch of them. And I was like, oh no, and I'll take anything you got. and now they just announced that just last month or so that there are a bunch of models that they are bringing back because there's the demand for it again. And so I think that that's a pretty cool thing that we went full disc, and then everyone was like, wait a minute, this Kool-Aid doesn't taste as good as I thought it would. And we're starting to imagine different ways of doing things again. And that's entirely small cottage industry bike people, right? You know, there's no big component manufacturers making rim brakes anymore. I mean, arguably the little caliper brakes for roads, but they're trying to go disc even with that. And so I also found, Pagaccia was not riding a disc bike. There's some professional racers that are won't ride disc bikes because you don't need them. It just makes it makes the bike heavier, makes the fork less active. You're much more apt to lock up your brakes than to modulate them. Of course, the disc is a big safety factor in a peloton, which they've talked about that forever. So you can go on and on with that. That's my rim brake diatribe. I'll stop now. A great way to incorporate shifting that is not friction. If you're looking for, I'd say if you're looking, this is a great tip. Many people know it. Everyone know the Campagnolo 8-speed trick, 10-speed, 8-speed trick, is when Campagnolo, all road shifting, of course, is done in the big bulbous. I guess they kind of cram big hydraulic reservoirs into those things now too. We're back to GRX. Why is GRX so ugly? Okay, that's what we'll title this section. They're trying to cram everything they can in there. A big reservoir for your hydraulic fluid and your shifting, everything into these levers, right? Going back to the best levers that Shimano ever made, which were probably the first iteration of the Dura, or second iteration of the Dura system, they still looked like trash. They had the big cables coming out the sides. They were big and bulbous. You compared those to Campagnolo Ergo Power, it's no comparison. Campagnolo, hands down. And so that is really a great way to back then to kind of decide where you landed in the bicycle aesthetic realm. Were you a Campagnolo or a Shimano person, right? The Campagnolo people, there was even I think it was moderated by Richard Sachs back in the day. There was a site called Campagnolo Only. It probably wasn't moderated by Richard Sachs, but he was very active on it. I think that's how I found him. And I loved that. I loved how opinionated you could be on component manufacturing. I just globbed onto that, and I'm still there today. It was just a very cool thing. Those levers just still to this day look so beautiful. They look classic. It's an instant classic, something that was timeless. Just like the components that we put on all these bikes, these are going to look good in 100 years. It's still it's timeless. That's what beauty is. If you're making something that's not timeless, it's not objectively beautiful. So the Campagnolo Ergo Power, you don't have to have a Campagnolo rear cassette body to use Ergo Power. You could just use a Shimano cassette body, which are much more readily available, and put any old 8-speed cassette on there. It'll shift it, 10-speed to 8-speed. This is more for the people on YouTube. Look it up. Let's see. Saddles. Saddles are tough, right? You see those modern saddles that are like super short and have the big cutout in them, like Specialized made them like pretty popular. There's a bunch of like weird modern saddles. Like you could see somebody rolling up on what looks like a cool bike, then they hop off and you see the saddle and you're like, oh no, oh no. Well, that happens. There's a lot of course, Brooks makes a really handsome saddle, and even if you're vegan, they make those Cambium saddles. I'm not paid by Brooks anymore. Daddy Brooks dropped me. If you're listening, Daddy Brooks, like and subscribe. So they make some, and then Bertune makes cool saddles. There's a lot of like cool leather saddles that are being made out there today that you can buy. And of course, there's a ton of classics out there, like the Flight Titanium or the Turbo that'll split your pelvis in two, but you'll look cool. I'm still dealing with the ramifications of that, but I'm getting better. In closing, I've got something I wrote down here that we'll see how it comes out. These bikes we're building are supposed to be special, but they are limited to what modern component manufacturers make. They chase racers, but are we racing? Or do we want something reliable, self-serviceable, and parts that look beautiful in their function? The adage of that's the adage of a bygone era. Or are we coming back to that era? Well, we could try our best, and that's what we're doing with these types of builds. So if you're out there building a new bike, I invite you to do it without SRAM. Try it, okay? You could do it. I believe in all of you. Thank you. And, Adam Sklar's bike is for sale over here. If anybody wants to ask any questions on any of these two bikes or any kind of cross compatibility issues, I'm here for you. The shifting on this bike is these were Suntour power ratchets. I don't know if you can hear it. Oh. And I'll tell you, that power ratchet system is a joy to interact with. I'm telling you, you'll just be shifting for the heck of it. You'll be like, I don't need to shift right now, but I'm gonna. All right. These shifters are old. These would have come stock on your 1983 Stump Jumper, right? Yeah. And so they still work beautifully. The Suntour Sprint shifters, which were down tube shifters, Rivendell commandeered and borrowed the internals from and had them remade. Those are the silver shifters that everyone sees. Have the same kind of like power ratcheting internal, and it's beautiful. Feels great. Love interacting with those. So it's nice to have these shifters turned in, like switched and turned inwards on swept back handlebars, because you could just kind of tuck your thumb in there and it does all the work for you. You never have to leave the handlebar. So it's a really nice shifting system.
Can you talk a little bit about your handlebar journey over the past couple of years?
Oh, right. Yeah, the handlebar journey. My handlebar journey. I'd always been searching for something wider. I have really narrow. I'm tall, but I have really narrow shoulders. So I was always sized with road bikes on 38s, and I was always like, this just does not. Are you sure? And as I was getting out of road, my background in the 90s was mountain bike racing, and we were all on super narrow, like pogo stick bars, with the brake lines were touching each other, like right in the middle. They were so narrow, and we always said, oh, it's so we can get between trees. Like that was like our thing, especially on the East Coast with all the trees. It'd be like, oh, you can't ride wide bars here. No way you can ride our single track with wide bars. And so that was the thing then. And I went on to do road racing in the early 2000s. And once I got out of that, I was really into the idea of dirt drops, because I really like drop bars for all of their hand positions. A flat mountain bike handlebar, you only have one position unless you add bar ends, and those aren't always in style. So you gotta. And so I was like, wow, one hand position, huh? And I was like, this is no good. So when I started getting back more into off-road riding, I guess coming back to mountain biking and totally not even recognizing the sport as I had been out of it for 10 years when a lot of the technological innovations were happening. And trails were changing, and it was going from hiking trails that you could maybe ride to very like purpose-built like groomers at like ski resorts and whatnot. And so you're having like more and more suspension, more and more everything. And I was looking for something. I was looking for all-terrain, riding your bike to the trailhead, and maybe it's just a bunch of hiking trails. Maybe you're gonna have to carry your bike a little bit, but that's like the experience I was looking for in mountain biking, which is how I grew up riding mountain bikes. And so I wanted a handlebar that would work well with that sort of riding. And so I started with dirt drops, and then I was taught by a guy at a shop in Ojai, California, to start flaring standard road bars. And I really didn't understand until recently that those Giro d'Italia Cinelli bars is what Charlie Cunningham was flaring out initially. So flaring out your handlebars isn't any, people have been doing that for, it sounds real dangerous, but I really invite you to try it out. It's fun. You could really make some really cool proofs of concept with that. And so I started just flaring out wider and wider and wider handlebars until I told Matt at Crust that I wanted a bar that was 666 millimeters wide, because it's the magic number. So we went for it. And again, it's like we're in that era where you could really get stuff done even without the backing of a bigger company. And we got it done, and we've been kind of honing in those drop bars for a while, and it's been cool to see a lot of other like those wide bars become, especially on gravel bikes and off-road dirt drop bikes, like that's become like a thing now. So it's cool to see that was like something that people were going to be into. And although I don't think that they look great, that's my main thing. I was always like, with my handlebars on the bikes, I'm like, God, these are so comfortable. I'm like, I don't know, maybe at this angle, I don't know. I don't think I could go out today, And so I started, I think like the first month of the pandemic, I flared out a set of Boscos from Rivendell that Nitto make. Even though they were the heat-treated ones, they splayed right out, basically flattening them and getting them to be 69 wide, which is another magic number. And so I rode my Atlantis with those handlebars all summer, and I didn't even miss drop bars because I was able to adjust especially on like an all-terrain bike where you're riding to the trailhead and then you might have some gnarly trails with like some steep drops and whatnot. You're able to kind of put the whole bike out in front of you going down steep stuff. If you get behind the saddle here, you push the whole bike out in front of you, and you have this whole entire section here to change essentially, if I want more control. If I want to put more weight on the front wheel, I can move my hand up a little bit. If I want to sit more upright, like going up a hill and want to stretch my back out, I could just kind of put my palms right here and just do a very light touch on the front. Or if I want to get super aero, you just get right here, and it's super comfy, just cruising like that. So I was like, wow. I never thought I'd be an upright handlebar person, but here I am. And so we had these Uncle Ron's upright orthopedic back bars made. And and Matt was like, oh yeah, what the heck are you? Okay, I guess so, all right. And they were popular, people liked them. So we are making more of those. But there's you can get like the Loscos that Rivendell sells, or the Bosco. Boscos are a little bit too high rise for me. Like I'm not a proponent of super upright riding because it puts way too much weight on the saddle, and you're just going to wreck your undercarriage. So there is like a balance. You still have to have some weight on the front. So don't put your handlebars way up here. And if you're having butt problems, like if you're having butt problems, or if you're like everything's going numb down here or something, or if you're having to go get urethral stricture surgery, that's 3 times for me. You want to go down a little bit and have some weight on the front, and be able to control that a bit. And so that's why I have the nose up so high, because I could just kind of rock back and forth on that and find my happy place up there. And it's supremely comfortable. So it's been a neat journey, and it's never over.
Do you have any leverage issues?
I don't. And my trick for that is, you might notice that we only do bars that are 26.0. because we are a proponent of using a 25-4 stem clamp that you pry open with a screwdriver, which is what we did here. You put those things in there, they will not slip. It's true. Try using a 25-4 bar with a 26-0 clamp. You're going to slip all over the place. Okay, so there's a method to the madness. You just need a big screwdriver. You can get anything done.
So, two questions. Number one on, why doesn't anyone like front triples anymore? Like, I have a bunch of 90s bikes, all
yeah.
triples. I love triples, but everyone's gone away from that. And the second question is on just on quill stems, and it looks like you've got one that's full, one that's not. But
Yeah. The triples are a strange thing. I feel like I've got one bike with a triple on it, and I feel like I'm just doing too much shifting. There's never like a happy spot up front. Or if you get like a nice neutral main, like a 36, which I consider like a really neutral gear. You see a lot of one bys just have a 36. So I choose a 36, and I'm mainly in that 36 and using that rear range. But if I need it, that 20 is there. So I don't necessarily like shifting up front too much, only when necessary. And so with a triple, I felt like I'm always between gears, like I'm never in the right spot. I don't know if it's personal, something personal. If you got triples and you like them, then that's great. But I'm always like, for my pedaling style, I'm always like in between gears up there and need to shift too much. So I'd rather just leave it at 36, because I think a lot of them come standard with like a, do you know what your triple ring configuration is? It's like 46, yeah, I don't know, something like that. Yeah. Fairly, yeah, right. The big,
34, 46.
there we go, 24, 34, 46. So the 34 is just a little low for me to use. And then I feel like having that 46 on there, and if I'm rolling over logs, especially we're in the Northeast here. Is Philadelphia still the Northeast?
sure.
Yeah, we're in the Northeast. We're in New England. We're in the Appalachians. There's a lot of it's trees down, you got to go over logs. There's a lot of obstacles that you got to get over, and that 46 ring just gets mangled if you try to do stuff like that. And then you can't shift at all, and then banging it with rocks trying to get out of the trail. With quill stems, it's funny, I remember when a headset, which is what the first commercially marketed threadless system came out, and being like, oh, like why aren't they all like this? This seems so simple. I guess that's the only confusing thing about it is the star nut, right? But that's certainly not like a technological wonder, And so the threadless system is superior, but not aesthetically superior. Threaded, you're able to adjust your stack height on the fly. You're able to have a much more aesthetically pleasing stack. Like if I had to put even a 5mm spacer in there on the bottom, that would be too much. Like to look at that would pain me every night. Keep me up at night. So, but if I have a quill stem, you can do whatever you want with those things. It's something about that long, elegant neck that just looks beautiful and it's subjectively beautiful. So it's just the way I like to look at it.
Any opinion on frame material or just?
Yeah, I had as many of you may know, I've had an epiphany with aluminum that happened from revisiting my, I grew up riding Specialized M2 mountain bike frames, and everyone was always telling me, oh, those are so stiff, rigid, that. And I got I was experimenting. I've got a few Rivendels, but they're really heavy, and I have to end up, a lot of the trails that I ride, I have to walk them. I have to do a lot of walking, a lot of carrying my bike on my shoulder and walking and kind of like, dragging your bike up a little ledge or something. It just needed to be more like portable. And so I was like, well, I remember building some pretty light builds on my M2s back in the day, and I think I could get one for like $100 off eBay, and I could. And so I started trying out different aluminum frames, and kind of occupied occupied my brain during some stressful times. And I got to meditate on that for a little bit and ride those bikes and realize that stiffness is an illusion. And if you think about the bicycle in terms of it being like a truss shape, how they would build a bridge, like triangle, there is no vertical flex in a bike frame. You're not going to find that. Doesn't matter what material it is, there's no vertical flex. The only vertical flex you're getting is in your tire, your seat post, and your saddle, and your handlebars. and everything else is that you think you're feeling is not happening. It's an illusion. You just can't. And so what people feel in aluminum, they feel like, oh, it feels like sketchy or like tinny or something like that. It's all in it's all in the sustain of the material. Aluminum, I don't know if this is going to work, but you like hear steel versus aluminum. You know, it's a different sound. It rings more on aluminum. It needs to be that vibration that you feel needs to be dampened by something. And I thought, I didn't come up with this. I saw this on a YouTube channel. I should reference it. But the guy on the YouTube channel was like, well, you know, that like tinny feeling, that like vibration that you get from aluminum vibrating at a higher frequency can be dampened by having a bag on the bike. I was like, well, I sell bags. That's great. And so apparently, according to him, everything is sucked up by that soft material in the bag, and you don't get that vibration that you would get otherwise. I invite you to try this out yourself. But if I ride a steel bike and an aluminum bike back to back, I think, you know, the aluminum gets a bad rap in road bikes when you're on a 20 millimeter tire or something like that. Like, you're going to feel everything. You're going to feel that vibration for damn sure. When you move to fatter tires, where, you know, everything matters a lot less. Like, a lot of your ride quality is in your wheels and tires and not your frame. So what I love about aluminum is it's infinitely recyclable. It'll always be strong after you re-recycle it. This bike right here, we can, not that we would, because it's brand new and it's expensive, but you know, it's just, I think that's pretty cool, and I think it's cool that it's kind of like a low liar and bicycle frame material right now, and it's easily made in the USA, and it's a material that's super light, and you know, if you get it right, if you're like, oh, good at manufacturing aluminum, you can do it. It doesn't wear your tools out as quickly. You think about all the tubes that you're mitering on steel versus aluminum. Aluminum is a softer material, so it's a lot easier to work with in that way. Bruce?
What about the aesthetics between?
I love fat tubes, but I think it's because I grew up in the M2 era, you know, and I love Cuttinghams. I always thought aesthetically those are some of the coolest, because they're so, if anyone's not familiar, I would look up Charlie Cunningham's bikes. It's like this cool, I don't know, we keep saying it looks like a plumber made it or something, but it's like this cool like tech, like that you have to like look deeper into to see the beauty in. Like, it's something that you need, that's, I don't know, it's just this, this cool material, and it looks cool raw, and it has like this really, has a cool living finish. It's not going to corrode. Aesthetically, I just think it's really cool. I think it looks off-road ready. Anyone else? Mike?
What's up with the mid-fork mounts?
Yeah, the mid-fork mounts, those are the only Brazons you need, because you can install a pec deck on there. And I don't,
You don't have a hole at the top.
right, no, just for the pec deck, just for a little bag support. I think it's really important when you're building an all-terrain bicycle to make it as minimal, like the least amount of stuff to go wrong, and you want it to be super lightweight, and so you want it lightweight but durable. So you got to always keep just that balance in mind. Can I pick this bike up? Can I carry it on my back? How far can I carry it on my back? If I go up that mountain, can I get down the other side? Is it going to be fun getting down the other side, or do I care if it's fun getting down the other side? I don't know. You know, it's just part of the adventure. It's the experience of mountain biking that, again, is lost in the activity of it these days, I feel, at least. And that's certainly how components are designed.
Being heavily invested again in the rim brake game, brake pads.
Brake pads. I mean, Salmon Cool Stops, I think, are pretty sweet. Yeah, I love that Cool Stop as a company is still around. That's like look at the packaging of Cool Stop. It has not changed. There's still an eagle on it. It's like a literal picture of an eagle. And it's still made in the US, so it's pretty cool. Yeah, pretty cool.
What are the skewers?
Those are Paul skewers. Yeah. Again, like Paul, I think that's so cool. Like, I have a great deal of reverence for Paul, bucking all of the trends and still over 25 years later, still making high quality, like cool components in the US. And and paying his employees well and doing the whole thing. It's just such a cool, it's a gem. We should really be more appreciative because that's a rarity. It used to be used to be hundreds of companies like, not hundreds, but 20, 30, 40 companies like that in the 90s. Anyone else?
How's Frank built this one?
He did, yeah.
How's
Yeah.
working with Frank on this?
Yeah, working with Frank the Welder has been is just how he's synonymously known. Started building with Yeti way back. He probably started doing something else, but he built with Yeti, and he built bikes for Julie Furtado, John Tomac, Missy Giovi, like Miles Rockwell, all these big names in the 90s mountain bike scene. He then moved to Connecticut and worked for Spooky Cycles, which was a straight edge vegan hardcore cross-country mountain bike brand when cross-country mountain biking was as extreme as you can get. And those were the it bike for me growing up as a vegan straight edge hardcore kid. That was the coolest shit. And being from Connecticut also. And so that's really what kept me in the cross-country racing game, was knowing that people that cool were doing the thing also. And I always their bike was the Spooky Dark Side. That was like their New England, Connecticut specific cross-country hardtail. Had super steep angles and a super high bottom bracket, because oftentimes the average speed on a New England mountain bike ride is about 4 or 5 miles an hour. And they just don't design bikes for that. Everything's designed for Western high-speed trails, you know? And so it was cool to, like, you know, just kind of trials around on those things and go over logs and do that whole thing. Anyway, I thought about making this thing super steep with a high bottom bracket, but I don't think I'd sell many of them. So this bike has was kind of like my ode to the dark side with some modern accoutrements and went with it. And Frank was like, for somebody who's so prolific, you know, he's built thousands of bike frames in his time out of aluminum. And he's super friendly, super personable, and answers every phone call and email with a nice, friendly hello and tell me how things are in Vermont at any given moment. And like, oh yeah, just drinking some pumpkin spice latte by the fire. Real nice to hear from you. You know, it's a really sweet guy. I wish more people in the bike industry are like that, but it's the way things, you always get those curmudgeons, but Frank the Welder is a gem.
Ron, I know you've repped the Motolite V-brake in the past, and I see on here you run the Canties by Paul. What motivates you to choose cantilever versus
Great question. I think the lever choices for V-brakes for me, although Paul does make a long reach lever for his V-brakes, but it's like the lever choices aren't as nice. You know, the V-brakes are kind of the end of one era and the beginning of the dreaded new school dark age, as you recall. So those were kind of synonymous with one another. So a lot of like V-brake levers and V-brake designs are really ugly. Yeah, they work great, but they're ugly. And so, yeah, that's generally an aesthetic thing. And if you get this really, like cantilevers, especially low profile cantilevers like these, get a bad rap because people set them up wrong. There's a lot you want to research. Sheldon Brown, of course, great resource. You look up Mechanical Advantage Sheldon Brown and look at a bunch of really cool charts and graphs on how to set up your brakes and like where the power is coming from. And I started setting up my cable hangers super low. You almost want them dragging on the tire almost, and you get a lot of power out of those low profile brakes that way. And in many ways, I feel like they modulate a little bit better than a V-brake. V-brakes are almost too powerful, especially the Pauls. They're like crush a walnut power. Again, with the Paul Mini Motos, I have a set of those on a bike with 33s. Again, it's almost too much power. Yeah. And I would invite you to go check out Brian Chapman's booth. He makes his own brakes on a lot of bikes, and it is incredible to watch his Instagram and then go see that stuff in person. It's like so cool what you can do with brakes. So many cool designs out there, and yet we're like, just make them hydraulic and disc. Oh, yeah. Anyone else? All right, well, that's it. Thanks so much for coming and listening to me. Yeah. Have fun with your builds.
Thank you.
Thank you.